Let me ask you something. Have you ever seen a man walk away from a table where he knows he's been cheated, but he doesn't make a scene, he doesn't yell, doesn't throw a fit, doesn't slam the door? He just straightens his jacket, looks that man in the eye, and walks away with a quiet kind of power that sends shivers down everybody's spine. That, right there, is what India just did. India just stood up from the trade table, looked America dead in the eye, and said, "We're done here." And then turned, not to the West, but to the very nations the West spent years warning her about, Russia and China. You gotta understand, this ain't just about trade deals. This is about dignity. It's about sovereignty. It's about a country that was once treated like a pawn saying, "I'm the player now, and I choose which game I want to win." For too long, India sat across from the United States thinking that if it played by the rules, followed the script, kept quiet when insulted, tolerated the hypocrisy, that maybe, just maybe it'd be accepted as part of the Western club. But that club had no intention of letting India in fully. Oh, they liked India when it was buying weapons. They loved India when it was outsourcing software. They praised India when it was acting like a junior partner. But the moment India started dreaming big, thinking big, building big, they got nervous. See, when India started talking about digital independence, about localizing production, about building chips, tanks, missiles, AI, and even its own internet payment systems, that's when the mood changed. That's when the smiles got fake and the handshakes got colder. That's when Washington started whispering again behind closed doors, "Can we still control her?" And now, as we speak, the answer is playing out in real time. No, they can't, because India just made one of the boldest, coldest, most calculated moves in its modern history. It said goodbye to America's trade table and walked straight toward the dragon and the bear. Now let's get something real straight. This ain't about India surrendering to China or Russia. This ain't about making new masters. This is about rewriting the power dynamic. This is about showing the world that India chooses partnerships, not puppeteers. The decision to pivot away from American trade isn't made out of desperation. It's made out of deep, strategic clarity. You ever seen someone so confident in their own worth that they're willing to walk away from $1 million deal because they know what they bring to the table? That's India right now. You gotta look at the facts. America put restriction after restriction, tried to dictate who India could buy oil from, who India could trade arms with, who India should call friend or enemy. But India isn't playing the Cold War game no more. India's playing a different game entirely, one rooted in 4 billion minds, powered by centuries of civilization, and now, finally, driven by leadership that's unshakable. Because when India said no more trade with the U.S., it wasn't emotional, it was surgical, it was precise, it was clean, and it was backed by long conversations with Moscow and Beijing. Now you may say, wait a minute, isn't China a threat to India? Sure. They've had their border clashes, their standoffs, but what people forget is that India doesn't need to * China to * leverage * China. There's a difference, and the real flex here isn't who your friend is, it's who * needs * you. Because right now, both China and Russia need India more than the West wants to admit. Russia's isolated by sanctions, China's battling economic slowdown, and India walks in with a massive consumer base, tech innovation, global diplomatic credibility, and an unmatched demographic edge. So this pivot to the East, it ain't a gamble, it's an investment in self. It's the moment when India looked at the scales of global trade, saw how it's always been tipped, and decided to bring its own set of scales. Russia's offering discounted energy, raw materials, and defense collaboration. China's opening up routes for technology co-development, infrastructure funding, and even rare earth processing. and India's sitting in the middle, pulling the strings like a grandmaster on the chessboard. You know what's crazy? For decades, America used trade as a weapon. They sanctioned whoever didn't fall in line. They withheld technology. They dangled trade benefits like candy to a child. But India grew up. India's not interested in candy anymore. It wants the factory that makes the candy. It wants to own the sugar fields. It wants to write the recipes. And now it's doing exactly that with new partners who don't lecture her, don't micromanage her democracy, and don't punish her for refusing to toe the Western line. Let me paint you a picture. For the first time in history, we're seeing an axis where New Delhi, Moscow, and Beijing are talking not from a place of rivalry, but respect. It's a delicate dance, sure, but don't underestimate the music that's playing in the background. That music, it's the sound of the global order shifting. It's the hum of new alliances being formed not based on ideology, but on shared ambition. And India's role in this is not small. It's foundational. Think about it. With America, trade talks came with baggage, human rights sermons, climate lectures, press freedom concerns, and a dozen other double standards. But with Russia and China, it's business. Straight, if you deliver, you earn. If you commit, we collaborate. No strings, just strategy. And let me be clear, India ain't abandoning its values. India's just tired of being judged by people who don't practice what they preach. Now, you may wonder what this means for the average Indian. I'll tell you, it means cheaper energy. It means access to new markets. It means less dependency on a dollar that's being weaponized left and right. It means building a rupee-based trade corridor that could shake the IMF to its core. And more importantly, it means jobs, infrastructure, and national pride. It means making Made in India not just a slogan, but a signature stamped on every ship, plane, device, and satellite that leaves Indian shores. And don't think for a second that the West isn't watching this with panic. Because they thought they had India boxed in. But what do you do when the elephant in the room stops dancing and starts leading? You panic. Quietly. You shift your chairs. You call emergency meetings in Brussels, in Washington, in London. Because you realize, for the first time, that India doesn't need your permission. She never did. But now, she knows it too. This whole trade realignment is a message, not just to America, but to the world. It says, we're not here to be the next China. We're not here to copy anyone's model. We're here to be India, loud, proud, independent, and unbothered. And believe me, that kind of independence, it's magnetic. Africa is watching. Southeast Asia is watching. Even Europe's younger nations are quietly watching. Because when India moves with this kind of confidence, it gives others permission to dream of a future outside the shadow of the West. Let me tell you something else that's important. When a nation like India stops trading with a giant like America, it's not just economics. It's psychological warfare. It tells Wall Street that Delhi ain't afraid. It tells the Pentagon that India will not be coerced. It tells Silicon Valley that there are other valleys now. And it tells the average Indian youth, your destiny ain't outsourced anymore. This ain't a tantrum. This ain't a boycott. This is a blueprint. A blueprint for what happens when the world's oldest civilization wakes up with the mind of a startup and the soul of a warrior. India isn't anti-America. It's just done being underestimated. You can only be offered scraps so many times before you build your own kitchen. And let's be real, the trade wasn't balanced anyway. America sold India overregulated, overpriced goods while demanding open access to India's booming consumer markets. But what did India get in return? Sanctions threats every time it made a deal with Russia. Lectures every time it protected its farmers. Warnings every time it tried to assert its digital sovereignty. That's not partnership. That's control dressed as diplomacy. And India India just called the bluff. Let's talk about tech. The West thought they had India hooked on Silicon Valley forever. But what's happening now? India is building its own semiconductor ecosystem. It's building AI models that understand Sanskrit better than anything in California. It's launching satellites faster than most Western nations can test prototypes. And now, with Russian energy and Chinese raw materials, India is going to do it cheaper, faster, and smarter. Don't get it twisted. This move wasn't rushed. This was a long time coming. India had been warning, signaling, posturing for years. But now it's real, now it's official, and it's irreversible. Because once you taste freedom at that level, you don't go back to begging for seat upgrades. You fly your own damn plane. Now some folks might say, this could backfire. The West could retaliate, and maybe they will. Maybe there'll be tariffs. Maybe there'll be pressure on allies. But guess what? India's been through worse. Partition didn't break her. Wars didn't break her. Poverty didn't break her. And sanctions. Please, sanctions make her stronger. Because when the world tells India you can't, India hears watch me. And that's where we are today. Watching a nation that's no longer waiting for validation. No longer chasing handshakes. No longer clapping at the wrong applause. India's writing her own lines, designing her own stage, and building her own spotlight. So the next time someone asks, why did India end trade with America? Tell them this, because she outgrew the arrangement. Because she saw a better path. Because she got tired of being managed and decided to lead. And most of all, because she finally remembered who she is. She's the land of Chanakya and Chandrayaan, the birthplace of Zero and the next leader in quantum. A nation that bends time, bends steel and now, bends global narratives, and she ain't asking anyone for directions anymore. She's walking with giants, she's shaking hands with lions, and she's moving so quietly, so confidently, that even thunder is starting to whisper. This isn't East vs. West, it's India versus irrelevance, and India just chose dominance. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. For decades, India played it careful. It walked the tightrope between global powers, never wanting to offend the West while maintaining historical relationships with Russia, never fully aligning with one bloc or another. But all of that caution, all of that diplomatic balancing, eventually became a leash. A leash that restricted potential, ambition, and national pride. That leash has now been broken, and what stands in its place is a country that no longer seeks to fit into pre-existing world orders. It wants to build its own. India isn't aligning itself with one side or another anymore because it finally understands that playing middleman in someone else's power game is a fast track to being forgotten. So it stopped playing their game and started building its own. You see, irrelevance doesn't come in the form of being small or poor. It comes in being silent when it matters, and India has been silent long enough. It watched America shower military aid on Pakistan while questioning India's every strategic move. It watched the same nations who preach democracy turn a blind eye to terrorism rooted in its neighborhood. It saw the hypocrisy, tolerated it, absorbed it until now. Now that tolerance has expired. And in its place stands a nation that doesn't need anyone to explain what self-interest means, because India's learned the game and now it's rewriting the rules. It understands that to stay relevant, you can't just survive, you have to dominate. Dominate in strategy, dominate in narrative, dominate in innovation. This moment, where India pulls away from Western trade routes and leans into new corridors with Russia and China, isn't a pivot of desperation. It's a declaration of intent. It's a statement that says, we will no longer measure our success through your metrics. We will no longer ask for permission to rise. Because rising on their terms means compromise. It means bending to their rules, to their warnings, to their labels, and India's done with that. This is a nation that is not just trying to exist in a global system designed by others. It's actively challenging that system, not with force, but with strategy. Not with arrogance, but with clarity. A clarity that came from watching every hand that once reached out to shake slowly turn into a fist of control. And let's not confuse India's move to Russia and China as blind loyalty or new dependence. No, this is transactional diplomacy at its sharpest edge. This is a nation using every global fracture to its advantage. When the West sanctions Russia, India gets discounted oil. When China faces a manufacturing slowdown, India negotiates on favorable terms for its industrial base. When America withdraws technology support, India pushes its own startups to build alternatives. It's not about choosing East over West. It's about not letting either define what India can or cannot do. It's about using both sides until neither can use India anymore. The West still looks at India through a colonial lens. Do you comply? Do you align? Do you behave? And India's answer is no. Not anymore. It's not going to shrink itself to make anyone else comfortable. It's not going to keep quiet about its borders, its people, or its ambitions. And that discomfort the world feels, that's the sound of a sleeping civilization waking up and realizing it doesn't need validation. It just needs vision, and that vision is clear. Dominate or disappear. You dominate by creating, and India is creating missiles that rival the best space programs, that disrupt the monopoly digital frameworks that even Silicon Valley is trying to replicate. It's pushing beyond soft power into hard capability. It's not just exporting culture. It's exporting code, capability, capacity, and now it's exporting confidence. When India said no more trade dependency on America, it wasn't just a trade move. It was psychological warfare. It was a signal to the world that India is no longer interested in being managed, monitored, or mentored. It's interested in being respected. And make no mistake, this shift was triggered not just by economic factors, but by strategic ones. India watched how America used the dollar as a weapon. It saw how countries were cut off from systems like SWIFT at the push of a button. It understood deeply what that meant. Whoever controls your economy controls your sovereignty. So India began decoupling quietly, setting up alternative payment systems, building reserves in gold and other currencies, striking bilateral trade agreements that had nothing to do with the dollar. And when the time came, it did what many thought unthinkable. It stepped away from the American economic orbit, because you don't become dominant by being predictable, you become dominant by being unshakable. Even in defense, India has started to shape its doctrine differently. It's no longer waiting for someone to supply weapons. It's building them. It's not pleading for technology transfers. It's designing next-generation systems in-house. This isn't about looking for handouts. It's about sending a message to every nation. We're done playing with borrowed tools. We've got our own now. That confidence doesn't come from one factory or one policy. It comes from a mindset shift, from a nation that has decided that history will not remember her as a backup plan, but as the blueprint. And this blueprint is being read closely by countries across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. These regions have long lived in the shadow of Western models, told that progress comes from acceptance, not assertion. But India is showing a new path, one where you don't have to choose a master, you just need to master yourself. Where you can look at global superpowers and say, we're not intimidated by you because we've survived worse. And that resilience, that's the raw material of dominance, not just economic, but cultural, strategic, and civilizational. China knows this. That's why despite its tensions with India, it still engages. Russia knows this. That's why despite being isolated, it reaches out to India as an equal, not a subordinate. America knows this. That's why every move India makes is watched so closely, Because India is the only country that can shake hands with all three and still walk away independent. That kind of balancing act, it's not weakness, it's leverage. And India is using that leverage not to beg, but to build. When you choose dominance, you choose direction. India's direction is clear, toward self-reliance, toward regional leadership, toward a future where nobody else gets to write her narrative. And that narrative won't be about poverty and potential anymore. It will be about power, about position, about precision, because India doesn't want to be the world's conscience. It wants to be its compass. And that means sometimes turning your back on comfort and walking into complexity. Ending trade dependency on America is one of the most complex moves India has made, but it's also one of the most defining. Because it shows that India is ready to carry the cost of its own decisions, that it doesn't need economic babysitters or political handlers. It needs respect, and if it's not given, it will be earned. Earned through results, through resilience, through a kind of national self-belief that can't be imported or imposed. That belief is homegrown, forged in struggle, strengthened by failure, and now unleashed on a world that's still adjusting to the fact that the rules are changing, and India is writing some of them. There's nothing more threatening to the established world order than a country that refuses to stay in its assigned role. India was supposed to be the support act, the market, the ally, the partner, but never the lead, never the center. That was the unspoken agreement. But India just tore up that script, not with fury, but with focus. With a calm that makes people nervous, because there's nothing louder than a country that no longer needs to raise its voice to be heard. India speaks now with action, and that action says, we don't want your seat at the table, we're building our own table, and we're inviting who we choose. You dominate when others have to adjust to your rhythm, and that's what's happening. Trade blocks are shifting, alliances are being reimagined, economic corridors are being drawn that no longer begin in New York or end in Brussels. They start in Mumbai, pass through Vladivostok, and end in Shanghai. That's the new reality, that's the new India, an India that's not stuck in 1947 or 1991 or 2008. An India that's operating in 2025 with a mind that's light, years ahead. And it's not just policymakers who feel it. The youth feel it. The entrepreneurs feel it. The soldiers on the border feel it. The coders in Bengaluru feel it. There's a fire, a focus, a hunger to no longer explain, apologize, or wait. This is the India that doesn't just dream big, it delivers big. That doesn't just speak of potential, it wields it. That doesn't just wait for the world to notice, it forces the world to respond, and that response is telling. Some admire, some panic, some pretend not to notice, but all of them react. Because India chose relevance not by consensus, but by conviction. And when you do that, when you no longer seek relevance but define it, you don't just play the game. You become the game,